What happens when cops cross the line, thinking they can humiliate a woman with impunity? The cops thought they could afford anything to make fun of the humiliation, but when one of them lifted up the black woman's skirt, everything changed in seconds. They had no idea who was standing in front of them, and they were certainly not prepared for what happened next. Please hit subscribe if you believe in justice, and comment if you have ever seen injustice happen right before your eyes. The streets of Savannah, Georgia, had a way of humming at night, not loudly, not in a way that startled or disrupted, but in a subtle, unbroken rhythm, like a whisper between old trees, a soft reminder that life, even in its quietest moments, never truly sleeps. Porch lights flickered dimly through lace curtains, the air carried the scent of magnolia, exhaust, and the faint rustle of Spanish moss in the breeze, painting everything with an old-world stillness. Into that southern hush walked Sarah Matthews, tall, brown-skinned, her long frame relaxed but grounded, her steps measured in calm. She wasn't in a hurry, she never was, not anymore. She had just finished teaching her Thursday night self-defense class at the local community center on Waters Avenue. It wasn't a formal job, more of a calling. The women who came weren't there to become fighters, they came for something deeper: protection, confidence, a way to reclaim something they'd lost in silence. Some were young and full of fear, others, older, with the hardened look of survival behind their eyes. Sarah gave them what she could: a place to feel strong again. After all, she had been strong once, too strong enough to earn a name on national TV, to hear her name in sports broadcasts and gymnasiums. What if this woman's past strength turns the tables on her tormentors? But that was a long time ago. Back then, she was that girl on ESPN, the Taekwondo champion who carried herself like stone but moved like wind. Sponsors came calling, so did photographers, TV producers, brand managers. Then came the knee, one bad landing in a televised match in Dallas, and everything unraveled like the thread in a cheap sleeve. They loved her until she limped, then they called her difficult, then they stopped calling. She had no desire to win them back. Now, her world was smaller and infinitely more peaceful. She lived in a second-floor apartment over a used bookstore on East Broad. Her routine was simple: classes, coffee, and the long, silent walks she came to crave. That night, she wore a cotton black dress that fell just below her knees and white sneakers worn from use. The bag across her shoulder was heavy with pads and training gear, and, as always, she walked alone. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, but it was hers. She knew the cracks in the sidewalk, the slant of the trees, the leaning mailbox at the corner of Habersham, like a friend who'd had one too many. She just passed the corner store with the flickering neon open sign, though it hadn't been open past 9 p.m. in years, when she felt it, that subtle shift in the atmosphere, not quite fear, but a change in the fabric of the night, as if the air had taken a long inhale. She kept walking, didn't turn, didn't need to. The slow roll of tires behind her, deliberate and smooth, told her what was there: a police cruiser, no lights, no siren, just presence. She let her steps continue as if nothing had changed, but her muscles, trained by years of combat and instinct, had already taken inventory of every shadow, every possible exit. The car came closer. She heard the low murmur of voices inside, then a chuckle, soft, slurred, laced with a kind of confidence born not from kindness, but power. Well, came a voice from the open window, laced with southern charm twisted into condescension. Ain't you a sight to see tonight? Another voice, deeper and less amused, added, ain't it past your curfew, sweetheart? Sarah didn't respond, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned long ago that some responses don't require sound, they require stillness. Behind her, the cruiser didn't move past, it slowed further, almost idling. She turned the corner onto Drayton, as she always did, so did they. Another comment followed, louder now. What's a thick brown girl like you doing walking all alone out here, looking for trouble? Still, she said nothing. A pause, then the passenger door opened. One of the officers stepped out, walking with a swagger that belonged more in a high school hallway than a city street, young, clean-shaven, close-cut hair, maybe mid-20s. He approached her side with a kind of mock politeness. "Wait a second," he said, eyes scanning her up and down like she was inventory. "Aren't you that karate chick from TV? Damn, didn't think you'd be this real up close." He smirked. Sarah continued walking, but now she could see a shadow beside hers, matching her pace. "You used to kick people in the face for a living, huh?" he said. "Guess now you're just kicking it in the hood like the rest of your people." He laughed at his own joke. The car behind them crept forward, just slow enough to stay in sync. From inside, another officer called out, "Careful, Jake, she might actually dropkick your dumbass." Laughter. Sarah adjusted her grip on the strap of her bag, not from tension, just recalibration. Jake, or whatever his name was, stepped a little closer. "You know," he said, voice dropping, "a girl wearing a dress like that, well, some folks might get ideas." Then, without warning, he reached down and flicked the back of her dress upward, not a grab, not aggressive, just enough to shame, enough to claim. The laughter behind her cracked through the still night like glass under boot. One of them honked the horn twice. Sarah stopped walking. She didn't turn, not yet, not immediately. For a single breath, she stood there, frozen not by fear, but by focus. She had known many moments in her life, triumph, failure, silence, noise, but this was different. This wasn't a match she had trained for, this was something worse. Then she turned. Her body shifted like a tide, slow, controlled, her eyes locked onto his. The boy, Jake, froze mid-smirk, something in her gaze unspooled him. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured. "You think this is funny?" she asked. He faltered, then tried to regain ground. "Relax, it was a joke." "No," she said, stepping closer, "you don't get to joke about me, not tonight." He raised a hand, unsure now. "We were just messing around." Her hand moved a blur. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it behind his back, pulled him forward until he bent at the waist with a grunt. He didn't even have time to resist. The second cop bolted from the car. Sarah moved instinctively, spinning, using the momentum to drive her elbow into his side, a clean hit, just under the rib cage, right where body armor ends. He stumbled. The third stayed in the driver's seat, hand hovering near his gun, but he didn't draw, he was still watching, thinking. Sarah stood there, breath steady, chest rising and falling like the waves off Tybee Beach. She looked at them all, their uniforms, their weapons, their confusion, and said nothing. She didn't need to. She turned and walked away, and no one stopped her. Sarah's footsteps echoed down the quiet block, the rhythm of her sneakers against the sidewalk now slower, almost meditative. She didn't rush, she never did. The adrenaline had faded, but her breath remained steady, her pulse calm. Behind her, the cruiser hadn't moved. She could still feel their presence, not as a threat anymore, but as confusion, as silence, as an unanswered question hanging in the thick Georgia air. She turned the corner at East Broad and disappeared into the shadows cast by a flickering street lamp. Her building was 3 blocks away, and she walked those final minutes as if she hadn't just disarmed 2 uniformed officers and stared down a third without saying more than a few words. In the morning, the sun spilled through her blinds with no hint of what had happened the night before. Her small apartment smelled of strong coffee and sandalwood. She moved through her routine with deliberate ease, stretching, showering, checking on her peace lilies by the kitchen window. Her phone buzzed with nothing urgent: a community newsletter, a weather alert, and a reminder that her grocery order was ready for pickup. Nothing about the incident, nothing about the cruiser, just silence. But silence had a sound, if you knew how to listen. A few blocks away, inside Savannah Precinct 3, the tension was starting to grow roots. At first, it was subtle. The officer who had stayed behind in the cruiser, Tom Delaney, 27, still relatively new to the force, arrived at the station with dark circles under his eyes and a jaw set too tightly. He didn't join the usual morning chatter, he didn't linger near the coffee machine, he avoided eye contact. Across the room, Officer Jake Whitman, the one who had flicked the back of Sarah's dress, was quieter than usual, tapping his fingers against the desk in a staccato rhythm. He hadn't laughed at any of the usual jokes, he hadn't mentioned what happened, not directly, but the mood had shifted, and in a precinct, mood spreads faster than information. Sergeant Karen Lowe, a 22-year veteran who ran the admin staff, noticed it before anyone said a word. She'd seen this kind of silence before, not from guilt, but from ego dented by something it couldn't fully understand. When men like Jake stopped boasting and started blinking too much, she knew something was wrong. What if this single act of defiance sparks a reckoning within the police force? Around mid-morning, she walked past the break room and overheard a whisper, low and sharp. She didn't even say anything. There was the scrape of a chair, followed by footsteps that stopped when they noticed her presence. She kept walking, but she remembered. By noon, the unease was no longer confined to whispers. One of the dispatchers mentioned overhearing a strange call log that had no matching entry in the system. An IT technician flagged a missing body cam segment from Jake's shift, a deletion that didn't follow standard protocol. And then there was the internal feedback system, an anonymous message delivered to the inbox of Internal Affairs Junior Investigator Daniel Reyes with one line, "Watch Patrol Unit 14B. Something happened last night." Daniel almost dismissed it. Most of these anonymous notes were about internal politics. But something in the tone, quiet, certain, without embellishment, felt different. He pulled the patrol logs. The unit had no incident reports filed for a 2-hour window between 10:30 p.m. and 12:30 a.m., no citations, no traffic stops, no suspicious activity logs, just GPS movement through residential streets. One route traced past the elementary school near East Broad, too late for a school zone patrol, too quiet for a call. Daniel flagged it and noted the officers assigned to the cruiser, Officer Jake Whitman, Officer Marcus Fields, and Officer Tom Delaney. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. By that evening, the first ripple had become a current. Sergeant Lowe passed Officer Delaney in the parking lot, pacing between 2 rows of patrol cars, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and anxious. "She caught fragments, she grabbed me." "No, not like that. I don't know what she's going to do." She didn't intervene, but she made another mental note. Then, like a match dropped in dry brush, the rumor spread. A training officer from a neighboring shift mentioned hearing something about a civilian takedown. Someone said a woman had flipped 2 cops and walked off. Another mentioned Sarah's name. No one knew how they knew her, but someone remembered seeing her on a billboard for a sports clinic years ago. Her face, brown, fierce, proud, wasn't easily forgotten. By the following morning, the whispers became impossible to ignore. Captain Charles Brantley, head of Precinct 3, known more for his gruff tone and outdated mustache than for nuance, called the three officers into his office without ceremony. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He watched them as they sat, Delaney jittery, Whitman defensive, Fields strangely silent. "Something happened on patrol night before last?" he asked. No one answered, not immediately. Delaney looked at the floor, Fields looked at the wall. It was Whitman who finally muttered, "It was nothing." Brantley didn't blink. "Nothing," he repeated, then leaned back in his chair. "Then I'm guessing you won't mind if IIA takes a look at your footage." That broke them. Delaney spoke first. "I think we made a mistake," he said, voice cracking. The other two turned toward him, eyes wide, but he didn't stop. He told the truth, not all of it, not yet, but enough that they followed a woman, that they joked, that they said things they shouldn't have, that someone touched her dress, that she didn't respond the way they expected, that she walked away, and that afterward, something shifted in the air that hadn't settled since. Bradley didn't say anything, he just picked up the phone and called upstairs. By 4 p.m., Internal Affairs had opened an official review. The cruiser was impounded, body cam backups were retrieved. Officer Delaney was placed on administrative leave. Officers Fields and Whitman followed the next day. An internal memo with the phrase "possible misconduct involving civilian contact" made the rounds. No names, no press, but the story had already escaped the building. Sarah didn't know any of this, not officially, but she felt it in the way people looked at her the next time she walked into the coffee shop on Victory Drive. The man behind the counter, who usually joked with her, was quiet. The regular who always offered to carry her tea tray looked nervous when she declined. She wasn't a symbol, she wasn't a victim, she was just a woman who had chosen not to shrink, and the city didn't know what to do with that. Back in the precinct, the atmosphere was brittle. Officers spoke in clipped tones, conversations halted when certain names were mentioned. Even those who hadn't been involved felt the tension. It wasn't about what had happened anymore, it was about what it revealed, about how quickly the story spread, about how three armed men with badges had been rendered powerless by a single woman who didn't raise her voice. Delaney, now sitting alone in a dim Internal Affairs interview room, told his full version. He admitted the jokes, the laughter, the flick of the dress, the expectation of fear, and then he described what actually happened: the silence, the look in her eyes, the precise, unflinching movement, the way she took control without shouting, without threats, just presence. "She wasn't scared of us," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "We were scared of her." The IIA investigator across from him stopped writing for a moment. "You think she should have been scared?" Delaney paused, then shook his head. "No, I think we should have been." By the end of the week, the city had started whispering, too. The headline appeared quietly, no screaming fonts, no dramatic photos, just a small article on the bottom half of the local newspaper's Metro section: 3 officers on leave pending internal review of civilian incident. There were no names, no details, just the basic summary: a potential violation during a routine patrol. But by the time the story made its way to social media, the dots had already been connected. People remembered, Savannah wasn't New York or LA. Stories had a way of slipping through back doors and into diners and barber shops faster than any reporter could write them. By the second day, someone had posted an old clip of Sarah from her competition days, breaking boards on ESPN in a crisp white dobok, sweat dripping from her brow, her name chanted by a crowd. Comments flooded in beneath the video: "Is this her? Wait, they tried that with her?" She still lives here? Sarah saw none of it firsthand. She stayed offline, as she always did. Her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer, from old contacts, former teammates, a reporter in Atlanta who left 3 voicemails back to back. Instead, she focused on her morning rituals. She walked her route, she returned to the community center, she taught her Thursday class, and she waited, not for justice, not for headlines, she waited because she knew that when power is challenged, it rarely retreats quietly, it waits for the right moment to bite back. On Monday, the cruiser appeared again, this time parked across from her building, different unit, different faces, but the message was the same. They were watching, not to intimidate, not yet, they were assessing, trying to gauge what she would do next, whether she would go public, whether she would push this further. She didn't acknowledge them, just sipped her coffee on the sidewalk bench outside her building, eyes behind sunglasses unreadable. But she felt them watching, guessing, whispering among themselves. Inside the precinct, no one said her name out loud anymore. The 3 officers were still on leave. Delaney had stopped coming in altogether, reportedly citing stress and seeking mental health days. Whitman had retained legal counsel. Fields refused all further interviews. Every officer in the building knew about the review, but no one wanted to be attached to it. Meetings became shorter, hallways, quieter. Every glance lingered just a beat longer than before. Even the ones who had nothing to do with that night had started choosing their words more carefully. The air was thick, not with fear, but with recognition that the illusion of invincibility had cracked. Captain Bradley, who once ruled the floor with easy sarcasm and the confidence of a man who believed in his own immunity, now kept his office door closed more often than not. The pressure had shifted. The questions coming from above weren't just about the incident, they were about the culture, about precedent, about what else had gone unchecked. He knew what it meant: one misstep now, and it wouldn't just be 3 officers, it could be the entire command chain. So he scheduled sensitivity training, mandated new reporting protocols, issued internal memos about accountability culture, but everyone knew it wasn't about change, it was about optics. Meanwhile, Sarah continued as if nothing had happened. She didn't show up on the news, she didn't press charges, she didn't sue. That silence unnerved them more than any legal filing could. She had spoken not with her mouth, but with her body, with the way she'd stood firm, walked away, and made them feel like children playing with power they didn't understand. One afternoon, as she left the cafe on Victory, a man approached her cautiously, mid-40s, uniformed but off-duty, his posture hesitant. "Ms. Matthews?" he asked. She turned slowly, met his gaze. "I work at the precinct," he said. I wanted to say some folks are talking." She waited. He swallowed hard. "They're not scared of getting caught," he continued. "They're scared because they don't know what you'll do next." She looked at him, really looked, and, after a long pause, gave a small nod. "That makes 2 of us," she said. He nodded back and walked away. The investigation, now under external review, picked up pace. Surveillance footage from a nearby dry cleaner confirmed parts of Sarah's account. The missing body cam segment had been quietly recovered from a server backup. The report from Internal Affairs described behavioral misconduct, unauthorized contact, and verbal escalation with racial overtones. One line in particular stood out: the civilian did not provoke, the officers escalated. That sentence made its way into another memo, and then into a broader report passed to city officials. A name that had once been synonymous with medals and martial arts was now appearing in boardrooms and budget meetings, quietly, reluctantly, unavoidably. Sarah kept walking her route. She passed the mural of Rosa Parks, now retouched once again after another act of vandalism. She paused briefly, then kept going. People recognized her more now, some nodded, some looked away. A few women approached her in grocery aisles or on the sidewalk to say thank you, not for fighting, but for not backing down. "My daughter's learning self-defense now because of you," one said, "not because she wants to fight, but because she wants to know what it feels like to hold space for herself." Sarah just smiled, nodded, and moved on. Weeks passed. One officer was formally suspended, another resigned before hearings began. Delaney, in a moment that surprised even his attorney, volunteered for a second interview. "I don't want to be the guy that lets this slide," he said. "What we did, that wasn't just stupid, it was part of something bigger, and she stopped it." Internal Affairs marked his cooperation as extraordinary. Though the court of public opinion had already decided on a deeper verdict, the silence had been broken, and once it breaks, it doesn't heal back the same. Sarah never issued a public statement. She turned down the interview requests, ignored the email offers for her side of the story, because the truth wasn't something she needed to explain. It had already been witnessed in the way she stood, in the way she refused to flinch, in the way an entire department floundered under the weight of a moment it couldn't define or dismiss. One morning, as fall settled over the city and the streets turned brittle with wind, she walked the same route she had walked that night, past the closed elementary school, past the crooked fence, past the place where her dress had been flicked up by a stranger who wore a badge. The sidewalk had been patched since then, the street light replaced, a camera now hung on the corner utility pole. "City initiative," they said, but the space still held something, not fear, not shame, just memory. She paused for a second, looked around, no one there, no one watching. She adjusted the strap on her bag and continued walking, her footsteps steady, her shadow stretching long in the early light. They had tried to reduce her to a moment, but she had become a mirror, and everyone, officers, officials, bystanders, had been forced to look, and for once, they couldn't look away. If this powerful story of resilience and justice inspires you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more impactful tales on BUP stories.